I sent money to my parents every month for years, but when my mom said they never got anything, I realized someone in my family was hiding the truth. The first time my mother said it in front of other people, she didn't even lower her voice. "You'll never be as good as your sister." The room went quiet for half a second, just long enough for me to hear the clink of my own coffee cup against the saucer. Just long enough for me to realize my father wasn't going to stop her this time either. So I stood up, looked straight at both of them, and said, "Then tell her to pay all the bills. I'm not sending money anymore." My mother laughed, and then she said the sentence that split my life clean in two: "We never received a single dollar from you." I wish I could say I knew immediately what that meant. I didn't. At that moment, all I felt was the blood rushing in my ears, my heart pounding so hard it made the edges of my vision blur. I remember staring at my mother's face, trying to decide whether she was lying, losing her memory, or trying to humiliate me in front of my sister. My father kept his eyes on the table. My sister, Vanessa, leaned back in her chair with that familiar, polished, innocent expression she always wore when chaos she created was about to bloom around someone else. I didn't realize then that my mother had just uncovered a theft that had been happening for nearly 6 years. And I definitely didn't realize that before the week was over, my entire family would turn on itself so violently that one of us would be escorted out of a funeral home by security. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Claire Duval. I'm 38 years old. I work as a senior project accountant for a commercial construction firm in Raleigh, North Carolina, and until that Sunday afternoon, I thought I understood exactly what my place in my family was. I was the reliable one. Vanessa was the golden one. That had been true for as long as I could remember. If Vanessa got a B+ in high school chemistry, my mother framed it as proof of resilience, because science just isn't her natural gift. If I got an A- in advanced calculus, my father frowned and asked what kept me from getting the full A. Vanessa was creative, sensitive, special. I was capable, practical, strong, which sounds like a compliment until you realize those words were only ever used when people wanted something from me. By the time we were adults, the pattern had hardened into family law. Vanessa made dramatic choices. I cleaned them up. Vanessa quit jobs because her manager didn't understand her energy. I helped with rent. Vanessa dated men with motorcycles, debt, and elaborate excuses. I paid for emergency locksmiths, towing fees, and once, humiliatingly, the deductible after one of them backed her leased SUV into a mailbox while high. When our grandmother got sick, Vanessa cried loudly in waiting rooms and posted filtered black and white photos with sentimental captions. I handled insurance forms, medication schedules, and the spreadsheet of rotating care shifts. After Grandma died, my mother hugged Vanessa and said, "You loved her so deeply." I was standing 3 feet away holding the folder with the funeral paperwork. That was my role. Invisible labor, quiet sacrifice, no applause. And for a long time, I accepted it because I told myself it was temporary. That families go through seasons, that parents mellow with age, that if I just kept showing up, kept helping, kept being the adult in the room, one day they'd see me clearly. People who grow up hungry for love become experts at surviving on crumbs. When I was 27, I moved 2 hours away for work. Not across the country, not even far enough for the distance to be a real excuse, but it was enough to give me my own rent, my own grocery bills, my own life. Enough to understand, for the first time, how quiet peace could be. That same year, Dad had his first minor stroke. It scared all of us, especially because he'd always been the stable center of the family, even if he was a silent one. He recovered well physically, but afterward he became anxious about money in a way I'd never seen before. My mother called me crying one night, saying the mortgage was tight, prescriptions were expensive, the house needed repairs, and Vanessa was trying her best, but had 2 small children and so much on her plate. I was making decent money by then, not rich, just stable. I had no kids, no spouse, and the kind of practical habits people mistake for wealth. I asked how much they needed. My mother hesitated, sighed, then said, "Honestly? Even $500 a month would help us breathe." $500 a month. I remember standing in my kitchen in socks, looking at a bag of spinach in my sink, thinking about my own student loans, my car payment, and the emergency fund I'd just started. 500 wasn't impossible. But it wasn't nothing either. Still, I said yes. She cried. She told me she didn't know what they'd do without me. She called me her rock. That's the thing about people who are starving for tenderness. The moment you're praised for carrying the load that's crushing you, you confuse it for love. I set up an automatic transfer the next morning. Over time, 500 became 800. Then 1,000. During the year, Dad needed a second procedure, and Mom claimed insurance was dragging its feet. I adjusted other parts of my life around it. I stopped taking vacations. I delayed replacing my old car, even after the air conditioner started dying every August. I turned down dinner invitations and said I was trying to be smart, financially. The truth was I was sending nearly $12,000 a year to my parents, on top of random extra expenses they called about breathlessly. A new water heater, a roof leak, property taxes, an overdue dental bill. Every time I sent it, my mother would text back some version of, "I don't know how we raised such a generous daughter." But she never said it in front of Vanessa. In front of Vanessa, the story was always different. Vanessa was the devoted daughter. Vanessa came by all the time. Vanessa brought the children. Vanessa checked in, emotionally. Vanessa understood family. I lived farther away, worked too much, and thought money solved everything. Maybe that should have made me suspicious. Maybe anyone healthier than me would have noticed the contradiction. Instead, I worked harder. Then I met Daniel. Daniel was 39, recently divorced when we started dating, and the first man who ever listened to me like my words weighed something, not just the dramatic parts, everything. What I ordered at restaurants, what I thought about city budgeting, why I hated hydrangeas. The first night he came over to my apartment, he looked around my tiny living room, noticed how carefully I'd arranged everything, and said, "You've built a calm life for yourself." I nearly cried, not because it was romantic, because no one had ever described my life as something I built. In my family, I was just the extension cord everyone plugged into. Daniel started noticing things I'd normalized. The way my mother only called after 6 in the evening, usually right after I got home from work, as if she sensed when I was too tired to defend myself. The way my father never got on the phone unless they needed me to feel guilty. The way Vanessa only contacted me when she needed a favor, but could go 6 months without asking how I was. The way every family gathering ended with me somehow apologizing. One Saturday, maybe 8 months into our relationship, I was at Daniel's place when my mother called in tears because Dad's blood pressure monitor finally died and they needed a new one that day. I ordered one online and sent it to arrive same day. After I hung up, Daniel asked, "Didn't you just send them $1,000 this month?" "Yes." "And they can't buy a blood pressure monitor?" "It's probably just bad timing." He gave me a look I came to know well, not judgment, concern sharpened by restraint. "Claire," he said carefully, "I'm not saying don't help them. I'm saying you never seem to know where the money actually goes." That irritated me instantly, which should have told me he was near the truth. "You don't understand my family." "No," he said. "I understand enough to see that you are always in crisis on behalf of people who somehow still find ways to call you selfish." I snapped at him. We fought. Then I went home and spent the rest of the weekend feeling ashamed. Not because I believed he was wrong, but because a part of me had recognized something I didn't want to look at. Still, I kept sending money. Years passed that way. Daniel and I married when I was 34. Small ceremony, courthouse first, then dinner with close friends and family. My parents came, of course. Vanessa arrived 40 minutes late in a cream-colored dress that was just shy of white. Mom laughed it off. That's just Vanessa. At the dinner, my father gave a toast about resilience and loyalty and how proud he was that I'd finally found someone patient enough for my independent streak. Vanessa gave a toast, too. She talked about how hard it had been, sharing me with a husband now, as if I'd been an appliance she'd lent out. Everybody chuckled. Daniel squeezed my knee under the table so hard I knew he was angry for me. By then, the monthly support had become so embedded in my life that Daniel and I treated it like another bill. He didn't love it, but he never tried to control me. He'd ask questions sometimes, practical questions. Did they send you the quote for the roof repair? How much exactly was Dad's copay? Why is Vanessa, who lives 15 minutes away, never covering any of this? And every time, I'd have answers that sounded reasonable enough to keep the peace and flimsy enough that I could feel them bending in my own mouth. Mom would say Vanessa helped in other ways. Mom would say Vanessa had the kids. Mom would say Vanessa's husband, Brent, was between opportunities again. Mom would say, "Not everything is about numbers, Claire." It became such a familiar line that I started hearing it before she said it. Not everything is about numbers. Easy for people to say when someone else is paying. Then came the dinner. It was my parents' 45th anniversary, a big family lunch at an Italian restaurant they liked because the owner knew my mother's name and always gave her free tiramisu. Daniel couldn't come because he was out of town for a supplier conference, so I drove down alone with a wrapped gift and a quiet headache already forming behind my left eye. The gathering was exactly what these events always were. Cousins I barely saw. Aunts who specialized in whispering while pretending not to. Grandchildren running underfoot. And my mother in the center of it all wearing approval like a crown. Vanessa arrived 20 minutes late, in a fitted emerald dress and large sunglasses despite being indoors, kissed the air near everyone's face, and handed my mother a framed photo collage of the kids. My gift was an envelope with a weekend inn reservation for my parents in Asheville. Paid in full. Guess which one got tears? We hadn't even ordered appetizers before the comparisons started. Vanessa had recently launched some kind of online boutique selling elevated seasonal home pieces, which turned out to be heavily marked up candles, ceramic pumpkins, and throw blankets she sourced from wholesalers. My mother talked about it like Vanessa had founded a tech company. "She's just fearless," Mom said, smiling around the table. "She takes risks. She goes after what she wants." I sipped water. Then my Aunt Lorraine asked me how work was, and before I could answer, Mom said, "Oh, Claire's the same as always. Busy, busy, busy. She thinks if she works hard enough, the world will clap." A few people laughed. I felt my neck go hot. "My job's going well, actually. We closed the Franklin account last month, so—" Vanessa interrupted. "Claire's always been the ambitious one." I could never live to work like that. The way she said it made it sound dirty, hard, grasping, joyless. And because my family had been practicing this choreography all our lives, everyone fell into step. Mom sighed. "Some people are just built for warmth. Some are built for productivity." I set my glass down. I should tell you this. By that point, I had paid for Dad's medication for almost 6 years. I had covered emergency house repairs. I had sent birthday money for both Vanessa's children more than once because Vanessa forgot. I had lent Vanessa $2,000 the year before when Brent lost another job, and when she repaid only $300 of it, my mother told me to let the rest go, because family doesn't keep score. So when my mother smiled sweetly and said, "You'll never be as good as your sister," it wasn't just about that sentence. It was about every year that sentence had been implied, and something inside me snapped cleanly, almost quietly. I stood up. The chair legs scraped the floor loud enough to turn heads from nearby tables. "You know what?" I said. "Then tell her to pay all the bills. I'm done. I'm not sending money anymore." My mother blinked at me. Vanessa frowned, still composed. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the mortgage help. Dad's prescriptions, the repairs, the taxes, The random emergencies, if she's so much better, let her do it. It would be nice to say I delivered that speech in a cool, controlled voice. I didn't. My voice shook. Years of humiliation were coming out of me without polish. My father looked up then, startled. "Claire, now isn't the time." "No," I said. "Actually, it's exactly the time." Mom's face changed first to confusion, then offense. "What bills?" I laughed once, sharp and unbelieving. "The bills I've been paying for years." Vanessa's eyebrows lifted. "You send Mom and Dad money?" The room had gone utterly still. My mother stared at me like I was speaking another language. Then she said, "We never received a single dollar from you." That sentence landed like a dropped tray. Loud, shattering, impossible to ignore. I remember the silence after it more vividly than the words themselves. My Aunt Lorraine actually put her fork down. One of Vanessa's boys asked if he could have more Sprite and got shushed so hard he flinched. I looked at my father. "Dad?" He seemed confused, too, not guilty. Genuinely confused. "Claire," he said slowly, "your mother handles the checking account." My stomach dropped, because suddenly, all the texts made sense. Not everything is about numbers. Don't bring your sister into this. We're managing. And under that, like a shape rising beneath water, another memory surfaced. 3 years earlier, Mom had called me saying they were switching banks because of fraud issues, and she'd asked me to route future transfers through Vanessa for a month or two because Vanessa was helping Dad sort paperwork after the stroke. She said it would be easier, simpler, temporary. Temporary became permanent without anyone ever saying so. I had been sending the money to Vanessa's account for years. I turned to my sister so slowly it felt like moving through glue. Vanessa's expression was remarkable. Not panic. Not yet. First came indignation, because that was her instinctive armor. Then, just for a split second, I saw something naked beneath it. Fear. "Claire," she said carefully, "you know I've always helped Mom and Dad. Sometimes funds get mixed with... Did you steal it?" Gasps around the table. Mom made a horrified sound. "Claire." But I wasn't looking at her. "Did you steal the money I sent for them?" Vanessa's chin lifted. "Do not use that word." "Why not?" "Is there a better one?" She pushed back her chair. "I have covered things for this family that you know nothing about." "Then this should be easy," I said. "Tell them right now how much I sent and where it went." Vanessa looked at my mother, not me. Classic Vanessa. Search for rescue from the authority figure, not accountability from the injured one. Mom, predictably, went into triage mode. "We are not doing this here." "No," I said. "We're doing it exactly here. Because you all had no problem insulting me exactly here." My father rubbed a hand over his mouth. He looked older than I'd ever seen him. "Vanessa," he said, voice low, answered the question. She crossed her arms. "I'm not being ambushed in a restaurant like some criminal." There it was. Not denial, not surprise. Just outrage at the setting. I felt cold all over. "How much?" I asked again. She said nothing. My mother stood. "That's enough." Something in her tone made the old reflex rise in me. Sit down, be good, apologize, smooth it over. For one dangerous moment, I nearly obeyed it. Then I thought of every transfer confirmation. Every night I'd reheated leftovers instead of going out. Every hour of overtime. Every time Daniel had asked if I was sure. Every time my mother called Vanessa generous while I funded the life they were praising her for. I picked up my purse. "You have 24 hours, I said, looking at Vanessa. Then I start pulling statements. Vanessa scoffed. "Oh, please. Be as dramatic as you want." I leaned in just enough for only our table to hear me. "I'm done protecting you from the consequences of your own life." Then I walked out. In the parking lot, my hands shook so badly I couldn't unlock my car on the first try. I sat behind the wheel for 10 minutes without starting the engine. My phone buzzed 3 times in a row. First from Mom, then Vanessa, then Mom again. I ignored all of them and called Daniel. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, you okay?" "No," I said, and my voice cracked on the single syllable. He went quiet in that alert way he had when something serious happened. "Talk to me." So I did. I told him everything in one breathless, disbelieving rush. The comparison, my outburst, my mother's sentence, the transfers to Vanessa's account, the look on her face. Daniel didn't speak for several seconds. Then he said, very evenly, "Come home. Do not answer any of them yet. We're pulling every record tonight." It sounds like a small word. It isn't. Sometimes it's the difference between drowning and being dragged back to shore. By the time I got home, Daniel had already opened his laptop at the dining table. He had legal pads out, pens lined up, and that calm, concentrated expression that always made me feel like chaos could still be organized. "Sit," he said gently. For the next 4 hours, we went through 6 years of statements. At first, it was mechanical. Search email confirmations, cross-reference bank transfers, copy dates and amounts, build a spreadsheet. But as the numbers grew, so did the horror. 500, 500, 800, 1,000, 1,200 for roof repair, 900 for medication shortfall, 1,500 for property tax emergency, 300 here, 600 there, holiday extras, birthday extras, a temporary transfer during Brent's unemployment, a small bridge, while Dad's cardiology bill processed. By midnight, the total was $68,430. I stared at the number until it stopped looking real. $68,430, more than the down payment we'd nearly put on a larger house before deciding to wait, more than my remaining student loan balance at the time, more than the car I kept patching together, because other priorities came first. Daniel blew out a breath and sat back. "Claire," I looked at him, "this is theft." I wanted him to be wrong. Even then, even with a spreadsheet in front of me, some childish part of me still wanted there to be a softer explanation. Miscommunication, poor bookkeeping, a stupid family mess that could be sorted with tears and apologies. "Maybe she passed some of it on," I whispered. "Maybe," he said. "But your mother's reaction tells me not enough to matter." My phone had 31 unread messages by then. "Mom, I don't know why you did that today." "Mom, your father's blood pressure is through the roof." "Vanessa, I'm not being spoken to that way." "Vanessa, you have always resented me." "Mom, call me now." "Mom, this family does not deserve this humiliation." "Vanessa, some of that money was for shared family expenses." "Vanessa, also, do not threaten me." There were no messages saying, "Claire, I'm sorry." There were no messages saying, "Let me explain where the money went." There were no messages saying, "We had no idea." Just anger that I had exposed something. Daniel read over my shoulder and said, "That tells you everything." At 12:18 a.m., my father finally texted, "Dad, I did not know. Please call me tomorrow before you call anyone else." That was the message that broke me, because it was the first honest sentence of the day. I cried so hard, I had to press both palms to my eyes. Daniel came around the table and held me while I shook. I cried for the money, yes, but more than that for the years, for how desperately I had tried to buy my way into being valued, for how eagerly I had believed praise sent by text but never given in public, for how thoroughly I had trained myself to accept less. At some point, I pulled back and asked the question I'd been avoiding. "Do you think Mom knew?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. "I think," he said carefully, "your mother knew less than Vanessa, and more than she wants to admit." The next morning, I called my father first. He sounded hoarse, old, deflated. "Your mother's at church," he said. It was Monday. My mother only went to church on Mondays when she wanted sympathy without interruption. "I need you to tell me the truth," I said. He was quiet a moment. Then, about 3 years ago, your mother said Vanessa would help manage some things because of the trouble I was having after the stroke. I let her. I didn't want to keep up with online statements and passwords and all that. Your mother said it was under control. Did you ever ask where my money was coming from? I assumed it went into the household account. You assumed. His voice thinned. I know. That answer made me angrier than a lie might have. Because my father's lifelong sin wasn't cruelty. It was abdication. He gave away the power to protect people, then acted shocked when no one had. I'm sending you the spreadsheet, I said. I want you to look at it before I talk to Mom or Vanessa. He exhaled shakily. All right. Then he said something that stunned me. Claire, your mother told people Vanessa had been helping us. I closed my eyes. I know. No, he said. I mean, she told the neighbors, my brother, people from church, anyone who asked. That settled something ugly inside me. If Mom didn't know every dollar, she knew enough to build a public narrative on top of it. She had been spending my money while giving Vanessa my credit. Maybe she hadn't considered that theft because the money still benefited the family somehow. Maybe she'd justified it as keeping peace. Maybe she simply preferred the prettier story. Either way, the truth had become optional to her as long as the image held. An hour later, Mom called. She didn't start with apology either. Your father didn't sleep all night. Neither did I almost said. Instead, how much did you know? That is not how you speak to your mother. The old script. Straight to authority, bypassing accountability. I'm not doing this, I said. How much did you know? She huffed. I knew Vanessa helped us process transfers when you offered. I did not scrutinize the mechanics of it because I trusted both my daughters. Did you know she was keeping the money? Claire, don't use inflammatory language. So that's a yes. It is not a yes. It is a refusal to let you turn this into a police drama. I laughed in disbelief. $68,000 is already a police drama. She went silent. That number had landed. When she spoke again, her voice had softened, which with my mother was often more dangerous than yelling. Families do not survive by punishing each other. No. They survive by not stealing from each other. You have no idea what Vanessa has been dealing with. There it is, I said softly. What? The defense. Right on cue, because there are things you don't understand. Then tell me. Explain $68,000. She hesitated long enough that I knew whatever came next would be constructed, not remembered. Brent had setbacks. The children needed stability. Sometimes Vanessa borrowed with every intention of replacing it. I actually felt dizzy. Borrowed. Without telling me. While you all let me believe I was supporting you. Mom's voice sharpened. That money was still in the family. That sentence changed everything. I sat up straighter. Daniel, across the table pretending not to listen, while absolutely listening, looked at me and knew from my face that something irreversible had just happened. In the family, I repeated. Yes, Mom said, as if she'd found the sensible point. You act as though she bought yachts. She was trying to keep her household afloat. With money I sent for you. We all make sacrifices. No, I said quietly. I made sacrifices. You made excuses. She gasped, like I'd slapped her. Then she cried. My mother's tears once controlled every room she entered. Growing up, they were weather. When she cried, everything stopped and reorganized around her hurt. For years that worked on me too. Not that day. I want the full account history, I said. And I want it today. She sniffed. I can't just demand that from Vanessa. Then I will. Before she could answer, I hung up. That afternoon, Vanessa called 6 times. I didn't pick up. Then she sent a long text. You are blowing this out of proportion. Mom and Dad have benefited from plenty I've done that can't be measured in transfers. Childcare, groceries, emotional labor. You've always thought writing checks made you superior. I used some funds when things were tight, yes, but it was never malicious. I fully intended to make it right when the boutique scaled. Now you've humiliated everyone and made Dad sick. I hope you're proud of yourself. I read it twice. Then, a third time. Because manipulation that practiced is almost elegant. It takes your injury, drains it of detail, and hands it back to you as selfishness. Daniel took the phone from me. "Don't answer yet," he said. "I want to tear her apart." "You will. Better when it matters." That evening, my father called again. He sounded worse. "Your mother wants to handle this privately." "Of course she did. And you?" A long pause. "I want the truth." "Then get in the car and come here," I said. "Without Mom. Without Vanessa." He did that more than anything, told me how serious this had become. My father never defied my mother in ordinary circumstances, but at 7:30 that night, he pulled into our driveway alone, shoulders caved in, carrying a manila folder and looking like he'd aged 10 years in a day. I made coffee. Daniel sat with us for the first 20 minutes, just enough to anchor the conversation, then excused himself to the den to give us privacy while staying close. Dad opened the folder. Inside were old paper statements, property tax notices, medical bills, and a few handwritten notes in Mom's looping script. He placed them on the table carefully, like evidence in a case neither of us wanted. "I found these in the desk," he said. "Your mother keeps saying Vanessa always planned to settle things. Settle them with what?" He didn't answer. I took a breath. "Dad, I need you to be honest with me, even if it makes you look bad." He nodded once. "Did you know Vanessa and Brent were in financial trouble?" His mouth tightened. I knew Brent had credit card issues. I didn't know how bad. How bad was it? He rubbed his forehead. 2 years ago, there was talk of bankruptcy. I stared at him. And no one thought to mention that while routing my money through her account? He closed his eyes briefly. "Your mother said it would shame Vanessa unnecessarily." That was my mother's philosophy in one sentence. Shame must be prevented for the favored child, even if truth has to be strangled to do it. We spent 3 hours going through everything Dad brought. It became clear fast that my parents had not received most of the major transfers I'd sent. Some utility bills had been paid late. Dad's prescription receipts showed gaps that lined up with the exact months I'd sent emergency help. The roof estimate Mom had quoted me was real, but the contractor invoice was never fully paid until much later, using money from Dad's small retirement distribution, which meant my mother had asked me for funds in my father's name, accepted them through Vanessa, then let the household struggle anyway while the money disappeared into my sister's life. At one point, Dad put both hands over his face and said, "I don't understand how it got this far." I did, because one person lies, one person looks away, and one person keeps sacrificing because she's terrified that saying no will make her unlovable. That's how. Before Dad left, I asked him one more question. If I hadn't spoken up at dinner, would anyone have ever told me? He looked at me for so long that his silence became the answer. The next 48 hours were war. Mom called every relative likely to hear my version first. I know because by Tuesday evening I'd received messages from 2 aunts, a cousin, and even my mother's friend Patricia from church, all with variations of the same poisonous script. Families shouldn't air private matters. Vanessa is under enormous pressure. Your mother is heartbroken. Maybe there's been a misunderstanding. One aunt even wrote, "Your sister says some of the money was basically a gift." Basically, a gift. That phrase made me laugh so hard I scared myself. I responded to no one except Aunt Lorraine, the only relative who'd looked horrified at dinner instead of entertained. To her, I sent one screenshot, part of the spreadsheet with dates, amounts, and notes. 2 minutes later she replied, "My God, I'm sorry, that was all. It was enough." Vanessa, meanwhile, escalated from defensive to theatrical. She posted a quote on social media about being attacked by those who project their own bitterness, then another about surviving narcissistic family systems. I would have found it funny if it weren't so familiar. My sister weaponized therapy language, the way some people use expensive perfume, liberally and mostly to cover rot. Then Brent called. I had not expected that. Brent and I had never been close. He was the kind of man who always seemed half a step away from a fresh excuse, charming when sober, belligerent when cornered, and permanently convinced bad luck was a unique burden placed on him by an unjust universe. He called Wednesday morning at 9:12. "Claire," he said without greeting. "We need to calm this down." You know what I mean. "No, Brent. I really don't." He sighed like I was being unreasonable. "Look, Vanessa made some choices under stress. You're acting like she ran a Ponzi scheme." I almost admired the audacity. "How much do you know?" "I know enough to say legal threats would tear this family apart." I leaned back in my chair. "So there is something to be threatened over. Don't do that lawyer crap with me. I'm an accountant, Brent, not a lawyer. But I can still add." He lowered his voice. "Listen. We can work out a repayment plan." There it was. Not innocence. A plan. My pulse quickened. "How much?" "What? How much did you take?" He went quiet a beat too long. "Brent," he snapped, "you are sending money into a family support stream. Sometimes needs shifted. That's life." Family support stream. I actually wrote the phrase down after the call, because I wanted to remember exactly how people sound when they know they're guilty and decide language is their last hiding place. "I want numbers by tonight," I said, "and I want them in writing." He laughed bitterly. "You've always loved paperwork." "Yes," I said. "It makes lying harder." Then I hung up. That night, Daniel and I met with a lawyer friend of his named Melissa. Not to file anything yet, just to understand options. She listened quietly while I walked her through the timeline, asked for documentation, and flipped through the printed spreadsheet with the stillness of someone reading bad but unsurprising news. Finally, she said, "You need to stop framing this as a family misunderstanding. It may be emotionally complicated, but financially it's straightforward." Meaning you sent money under false pretenses to support specific people and specific expenses. Those funds were diverted. Intent matters, but so does pattern. And this pattern is ugly. I swallowed. Should I file a report? Melissa's answer was precise. That depends on what outcome you want. Criminal complaints create leverage but also fallout. Civil recovery is another path. But before either, I'd send a formal demand and preserve every record. I nodded, though my stomach nodded. Also, she added, "Be prepared for your family to act like accountability is the true betrayal." She was right. The formal demand went out Friday morning by email and certified mail. Polite, factual, devastating. It listed the transfers, asked for a complete accounting within 10 business days, and notified Vanessa and Brent that absent satisfactory explanation and repayment proposal, I would consider legal remedies. I copied my parents. My mother called within 12 minutes, shrieking so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "You sent a legal letter to your sister?" "Yes. You are trying to destroy her." "No," I said. "I'm asking her to explain why she stole from me. She is your blood. And I was apparently her funding source." My mother made a choked sound. "You are cruel, cold, calculating. I always worried marriage would make you harder." There was a time those words would have punctured me. That day they just sounded tired. "I'm the same person I've always been," I said. "I've just stopped being useful without question." She inhaled sharply. "After everything I did for you." I cut in. "Say it." "What?" "Say one thing you did for me that didn't also come with a comparison to Vanessa." Silence. I waited. Finally, she said, "You were always so difficult to praise." I felt something inside me settle with terrible calm. Not break. Settle. Because when a person tells you who you are to them, over and over, the greatest violence you can do to yourself is keep translating it into love. I ended the call. That weekend was the longest of my life. Half the family went to ground. A few sent vague peacekeeping texts. Aunt Lorraine called and said she was ashamed of what she'd witnessed for years without naming. My cousin Jenna admitted quietly that my mother often told people I was financially comfortable because I only think about myself. That one stunned me more than I expected. All those years I'd been stripping parts off my own life to support them, and my mother had apparently used my self-denial as evidence of selfishness. Vanessa eventually responded through a lawyer. That shocked everyone except Melissa. The letter was short and slippery. It denied intentional wrongdoing, claimed many funds were intermingled with generalized family support, asserted that my parents materially benefited from Vanessa's caregiving, and suggested my demands were emotionally retaliatory. No numbers, no accounting, just posture. Melissa smiled without humor when she read it. This is what people send when the facts are bad. Then came the second twist. On Monday afternoon, my father called and asked if he could come over again. His voice was strange, hushed, and urgent. When he arrived, he looked furious in a way I'd never seen before. He had found something. A credit card statement. Not his, Vanessa's. He'd discovered it accidentally because it was mailed to my parents' house. One of several cards Vanessa apparently had routed there over the years. My mother had always called the occasional letters old address clutter. On the statement were charges that lined up, almost mockingly, with months I remembered sending emergency help. A resort spa in Florida, designer children's clothes, a furniture boutique, a luxury beauty clinic, weekend dining tabs that made me blink. Not one yacht, as my mother had said, just 1,000 tiny luxuries purchased by a woman who claimed my money was helping the family survive. There was also a down payment to something labeled 5 Rain Studio LLC, or boutique. My emergency transfers had helped launch Vanessa's business. I looked at the statement, then at my father. Mom knew? He stared at the floor. She knew Vanessa was trying to build something. With my money. His jaw tightened. Your mother said it was all temporary, until the business succeeded. I laughed once, without joy. So she did know. He said nothing. Then, very quietly, I should have stopped this years ago. It was the first truly responsible thing I'd ever heard my father say. I expected that revelation to make me explode. Instead, I became colder, clearer. The next step was no longer about confusion. It was about evidence. Melissa sent a second letter requesting preservation of financial records and specifically referencing potential misuse of funds for personal and business expenses. That got a reaction. 2 hours later, Brent appeared at our house, unannounced. He banged on the front door hard enough to make me jump. Daniel got there before I did, and opened it only part way. Brent was flushed, sweating, furious. We need to talk. Daniel didn't move. You can email. This is family. Daniel's voice stayed flat. Then, maybe family shouldn't show up pounding on doors. I stepped into view behind him. What do you want? Brent looked from Daniel to me and chose me. Probably because he assumed I was still the softer target. You're ruining my wife over accounting technicalities. Accounting technicalities. You sent support money. Support got used. For spa weekends? His face flickered. He hadn't known about that statement. Good. You don't know what you're talking about, he said. I know enough. He pointed at me. You always hated seeing Vanessa have anything. That was so absurd I almost smiled. I practically paid for what she had. His eyes darted, recalculating. That's when Daniel stepped fully outside and closed the door behind him, leaving Brent on the porch and me just inside the sidelights, where I could still hear. I'm going to say this once, Daniel said. You are not going to intimidate my wife on my property. Brent puffed up. Mind your business. My wife is my business. There was a beat of silence. Then Daniel added, quieter and somehow more dangerous. The next time you come here uninvited, I call the police before I open the door. Brent muttered something ugly and stomped back to his truck. When Daniel came inside, my legs were shaking. He took my face in both hands. "You are safe." I nodded. But the truth was, I didn't feel safe. Not because Brent frightened me physically, though he did, because when family secrets come into light, people become strangers fast. The roles crack. Desperation shows through. You stop knowing what version of someone is coming to your door. A week later, Melissa filed. I won't pretend I felt triumphant signing the papers. I felt nauseated, sad, angry, embarrassed, childish even. Some old, humiliated version of me kept whispering, "See? This is why they called you cold. You'll always be the hard one." But another voice, newer and steadier, answered, "Hard is not the same as wrong." Once the filing became real, the family split openly. Aunt Lorraine and Cousin Jenna supported me quietly. Dad, to my astonishment, gave a statement to Melissa confirming that he believed funds intended for household support had been redirected without his knowledge. My mother called that betrayal. My father called it the truth. It was the worst fight of their marriage, and I know because one night he slept in his car at a rest area before driving to a motel, rather than go back into the house. Vanessa posted less after that. Interesting, isn't it? Public confidence shrinks when private discovery gains paper. There were depositions, bank subpoenas, more records than I knew what to do with. And with every new document, the picture sharpened. Vanessa had used my transfers as padding for a chronically unstable life. Some money went to groceries, yes. Some to childcare. Some probably even to things my parents indirectly benefited from. But enormous portions went to covering Brent's gambling losses, late car payments, boutique inventory, salon appointments, vacations spun as mental health breaks, and card minimums that kept the whole glittering disaster from collapsing too early. Worst of all, there were text exchanges between Vanessa and my mother that surfaced during discovery. I'll never forget reading them. Vanessa, she sent 1,200. "Can I keep 700 and move 500 to you? Mom, we need more for the water heater." Vanessa, I can't. Brent bounced something again. "I'll make it up next month." Mom, fine. But don't mention amounts to your father. Another one. Months later. Mom, Claire, asking if taxes got paid. Vanessa, tell her yes. I'm handling it. Mom, she's getting suspicious. Vanessa, then stop making her feel noble every time she sends money. Mom, easy for you to say. I sat in Melissa's office, holding those printouts so tightly they crumpled. There it was, not just theft, not just favoritism, coordination. My mother had known. Maybe not every dollar, every month, but enough, more than enough. Enough to lie repeatedly, enough to shape the narrative, enough to use me. I don't remember much of the drive home that day. Daniel says I came in, set my bag down, and stood in the kitchen without moving for almost 5 full minutes. Then I said, she knew. He didn't ask how much. He didn't soften it. He just came to me and said, I know. That night, I did something I should have done years earlier. I blocked my mother. Not forever, I told myself then, just until the case moved forward. But even as I did it, I knew something much bigger had ended. The mediation was scheduled for early September. By then, nearly 4 months had passed since the anniversary dinner. The story had traveled through the family like smoke, distorted, dramatized, denied, revived. In some versions, I was suing my sister over gift money. In others, Vanessa had had a temporary accounting error. In one especially creative rumor, Daniel had manipulated me into turning against my family because he wanted my inheritance, which would have been funny if my parents had possessed anything substantial to inherit. The truth was simpler and uglier. A family had built itself around one daughter's usefulness and the other daughter's fragility, until the fragile one learned she could devour without consequence, and the useful one forgot she was allowed to bleed. Mediation took place in a beige office building with stale coffee and 2 bright lights. Vanessa arrived in a cream pantsuit and pearls, looking like wealth itself had put on lipstick. Brent looked rumpled and mean. My mother came with them, though technically she was only a witness. My father came separately and sat near me. Seeing us all in one place again made me feel 11 years old and 40 all at once. Vanessa didn't look at me. That hurt more than open hostility would have. When the sessions began, the numbers did what numbers do. They stripped emotion of camouflage. The records were worse than Vanessa's lawyer had hoped, and better than mine had feared. There was no clean way to explain years of diversion, false pretenses, and personal spending patterns that overlapped suspiciously with my transfers. After 6 exhausting hours, Vanessa agreed to a structured repayment, partial liquidation of boutique inventory, and transfer of ownership of certain business assets into a recovery arrangement. It didn't cover everything. It never could. Money has edges. Betrayal seeps. But that wasn't the real payoff. The real payoff came during a break, in the hallway outside the conference rooms. My mother cornered me by the vending machines. Even then, even after documents, statements, and legal reality had shredded her favorite story, she opened with outrage. "You have humiliated this family beyond repair." I turned slowly to face her. For once, no restaurant, no relatives, no audience to manage, just fluorescent lights and the stink of stale chips. "You did that," I said. Her face hardened. "I was protecting all of you." "No. You were protecting the version of reality that let you keep loving Vanessa the way you wanted to." She recoiled. "How dare you? How dare I?" "Mom, I sent you money for years. I believed you. I believed you needed help. And while I worked overtime and postponed my own life, you let her use me." Tears sprang to her eyes, sudden and practiced. "You always make me the villain." I laughed, exhausted. "No. I spent my whole life making excuses so you wouldn't be one." That landed. She actually stepped back. Then she whispered the truest thing she ever said to me. "You were easier." I stared at her. She kept going, as if some dam had finally cracked, and she no longer knew how to stop. "You were always easier." Vanessa needed more. She broke faster, she hurt louder. You kept going. You were capable. You could survive things. You thought I'd survive being used too." Her mouth trembled, and there it was. No denial, no noble spin, just the brutal selfish arithmetic of a parent who sacrifices the stronger child because she assumes strength is endless. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to collapse. Instead, I just nodded once. "Thank you," I said. She looked confused. For what? For finally saying it plainly. Then I walked back into the mediation room and left her in the hallway alone. You would think that would be the emotional climax. It wasn't. 3 weeks later, my grandmother's sister, Aunt Eloise, the last of that generation, passed away. She had been 92, sharp-tongued, observant, and one of the only older relatives who'd ever looked at me with something like recognition. She wasn't close enough to rewrite my childhood, but she had a way of pressing folded cash into my palm when I was young and saying, "Don't let them make a workhorse out of you." At the time, I thought she meant chores. The visitation was held on a Thursday evening at a funeral home in Durham. I considered not going. Melissa had advised minimizing contact. Daniel would have supported staying home. But Aunt Eloise mattered to me. And I refused to let family dysfunction exile me from one more room, so I went. Daniel came too. The air inside the funeral home smelled like lilies and carpet cleaner. Soft organ music played from hidden speakers. Relatives clustered in dark clothes and hushed voices. I saw my mother across the room immediately. She saw me too, then looked away. Vanessa arrived 20 minutes later. She wasn't supposed to. At least, not according to her own previous dramatic declarations about how I had weaponized grief and family. But narcissists hate ceding a stage, and funerals are stages soaked in moral theater. She came in black, elegant, pale, a picture of wounded dignity, and within minutes, she started whispering. I could see it happening, little huddles, tilts of the head, sympathy faces. Two people glanced at me with the tense curiosity of those already fed a story. Daniel noticed too. "Stay with me," he murmured. I intended to. Then Cousin Jenna slipped over and said quietly, "She's telling people you forged some of the records." I turned so fast my heel skidded slightly on the polished floor. "What?" Jenna looked furious. She said the lawsuit forced her into settlement because you and your husband manipulated Dad. For a second, the room seemed to narrow. The flowers, the music, the murmuring, all of it receded behind a single clean fact. Even now, even here, she needed to preserve herself by erasing reality. I should have ignored it. I didn't. I walked straight across the room. Vanessa saw me coming and lifted her chin, already assuming whatever happened next could be styled into another performance where she was the graceful victim and I the savage aggressor. "What exactly did you tell them?" I asked. A hush spread in ripples around us. Funerals make gossip travel faster because everyone is already pretending not to watch. Vanessa gave me a sad little smile. "This is not the place." It wasn't the place when you were lying 2 minutes ago either. My mother appeared at Vanessa's side, as if summoned by instinct. "Claire," that single word held decades of warning. It no longer worked. "No," I said, still looking at Vanessa. "Say it here. Say that I forged records. Say Dad lied. Say the bank statements were fake." Vanessa's eyes glittered. I said, "You've turned a private misunderstanding into public punishment. You stole from me. Enough." My mother snapped. Several heads turned fully now. I heard Daniel behind me, close enough to intervene if needed. Then Vanessa did something extraordinary. She smiled, not sadly, not nervously, triumphantly, and she said, in a voice low but audible enough, "You always needed an audience before you felt important." I looked at her for one long second. Then I reached into my bag, pulled out a copy of the mediation summary I had brought because Melissa told me to keep documents on hand, and held it up. "You signed this," I said, 3 weeks ago." Her face drained. My mother hissed, "Put that away." "No." A couple of relatives stepped closer, not dramatically, just enough to listen better. "You told people I forged records," I continued, still calm. "This document states you agreed to repayment terms based on documented diversion of funds." Vanessa whispered, "You psycho." I almost smiled. And there's the accountability language again. What happened next changed everything. My mother grabbed for the paper, not at me, at the paper. Pure instinct. Destroy the evidence, preserve the illusion. Daniel moved between us fast, but not fast enough to stop the scene from becoming exactly what my mother had always feared. Visible, her hand caught the page, tore the corner, and someone gasped. The funeral director, a neat man in a gray suit, appeared almost instantly with the kind of calm face professionals wear when rich or unstable families start turning grief into spectacle. "Ladies," he said quietly, "I need to ask you to lower your voices." Vanessa, unbelievably, pointed at me. "She's harassing us." I held up the torn document. She tried to snatch evidence out of my hand. The director's face remained neutral, but he looked at the page, then at my mother's outstretched fingers, and came to the obvious conclusion. "Ma'am," he said to my mother, "I need you to step away." My mother stared at him in disbelief. No one had ever publicly corrected her. Not really. Not in a room where she couldn't reclaim moral authority through tears and family rank. "This is my aunt's visitation," she said, "and I'm responsible for maintaining order," he replied. "Please step back." She didn't. She looked around the room for support, expecting someone to rise to the occasion of protecting her dignity. No one moved. Not Vanessa, not the cousins, not the church friends who'd repeated her version for months, not even my father, who had just entered from the foyer and taken in the scene with the expression of a man who was finally too tired to lie for anyone. The funeral director signaled discreetly to another staff member. Security, apparently, was on site because high-emotion gatherings sometimes went sideways. That is how my mother, the same woman who spent decades curating the image of a respectable, admired family matriarch, ended up being escorted away from the front receiving area of her own aunt's visitation, while half the extended family watched in silence. She wasn't dragged. It wasn't theatrical. In some ways, that made it worse. It was orderly, professional, undeniable. Reality, at last, without varnish. Vanessa followed her out, hissing at everyone that we should be ashamed. My father stayed. He came to me slowly. "You shouldn't have had to do that here," he said. "No," I replied. "I shouldn't have had to do any of it anywhere." He nodded, eyes wet. We stood in silence for a moment beside Aunt Eloise's casket. Her face looked peaceful, in the strange, waxy way funeral peace never quite resembles the living. I thought of her little folded bills, her warning, the years I'd misunderstood. Then my father said, "I'm leaving your mother." I turned to him sharply. He looked almost embarrassed by the truth. "I've been staying in motels half the week. I signed a lease this morning." That was the third twist, and in some ways the saddest. Not because their marriage was worth saving, because I realized how many years he had also spent inside the same system, just with a different flavor of cowardice. He had chosen peace over truth until there was no peace left to choose. I didn't congratulate him. I just said, "I hope you mean it." "I do," and he did. The months after that were quieter than I expected, and lonelier than I thought possible. When you spend your whole life in a family role, even a painful one, losing it feels like vertigo. I had spent decades being the helper, the workhorse, the tolerated practical daughter. Once I stopped, the silence where those demands used to be felt unnatural. Some mornings I still half expected a manipulative text about a bill or crisis. Sometimes my hand reached for my phone before my mind caught up. Repayment began slowly. Not enough. Not elegant, but legally enforceable. Vanessa sold much of the boutique inventory. Brent took a job with his brother-in-law's logistics company after his own options narrowed. They downsized out of the house they'd been pretending they could afford. My mother moved in with Vanessa for a while, which from everything Cousin Jenna later told me, was a special kind of hell none of them had anticipated. It turns out the golden child glows less brightly when there's no invisible sister bankrolling the wattage. Dad moved into a small one-bedroom apartment near a lake path and started learning how to handle his own banking. The first time he logged into his own account without help, he called me sounding absurdly proud. I laughed, despite myself. Healing can be humiliatingly small at first. As for me, I went to therapy, not the performative kind my sister quoted online, the real kind, the sit in a chair and admit how hungry you've always been kind. The kind where a woman with kind eyes and devastating pattern recognition says things like, "You learned that being needed was the safest available substitute for being loved." I hated her for that one, because it was true. I told her stories I'd never properly named before, about being 14 and staying up until 1 a.m., making cupcakes for Vanessa's bake sale because she forgot, then hearing Mom praise Vanessa's thoughtfulness at school the next day, about paying part of Vanessa's community college tuition from my campus bookstore wages because Dad's overtime got cut, and being told not to mention it because it would embarrass her, about every holiday where my gifts were practical and hers were celebrated, about how I learned early that competence makes adults lean on you and resent you in the same breath. My therapist asked, "When did you first realize you were expected to absorb what others would not?" I laughed, then cried, because I didn't have a date. It was the climate of my childhood, not a single storm. Daniel was steady through all of it. Patient in the way that doesn't infantilize. Protective, without becoming controlling. One night, maybe 6 months after the anniversary dinner, we were sitting on the back patio eating takeout Chinese from the cartons because neither of us felt like plates. The air smelled like rain. I had just told him I felt guilty for how much calmer my life had become. He looked at me and said, "Peace will feel wrong for a while, because you were trained to confuse calm with abandonment." I set my chopsticks down. "You and my therapist should start charging by the wound." He smiled a little. "I'm serious." "I know." Then I asked the question that still haunted me sometimes. "Do you think I was stupid?" He frowned. "For what?" "For not seeing it sooner." His answer came instantly. "No. You were loyal in an environment that punished clear sight." I think about that sentence a lot, because people love to ask why victims don't notice sooner, why scapegoats keep giving, why the practical child stays practical long after the arrangement turns cruel. But family systems are not scams built overnight. They are cathedrals of repetition. You are born inside them. By the time you're old enough to question the stained glass, you've already been taught it's sacred. The first holiday I skipped was Thanksgiving. My mother sent one email from a new address because I'd blocked the old ones. Subject line: "Families belong together." The body was 3 paragraphs of martyrdom, selective memory, and one line that nearly made me choke on my coffee. "No mother is perfect, but I hope one day you remember all the love behind my mistakes." I didn't reply. Instead, Daniel and I rented a cabin 2 hours west with a fireplace, bad cell service, and a deck overlooking a river that made everything in my body unclench. We bought too much food, forgot cranberry sauce, and spent half of Thanksgiving afternoon hiking in old boots through cold air so clean it felt medicinal. That evening, as the light turned blue over the trees, Daniel handed me a mug of tea and asked, "What does freedom feel like today?" I thought about it. "Quiet," I said, a little sad. "Very expensive. Completely worth it." He raised his mug. "Too expensive freedom." I clinked mine against it. Too expensive freedom. Christmas was harder. Grief likes holidays because it can dress as nostalgia. I missed my father in the old family house way, though we saw each other separately now. I even missed the smell of my mother's cinnamon bread before I remembered that most Christmas mornings ended with someone crying, someone comparing, someone apologizing for the wrong thing. Dad came to our house for Christmas Eve instead. He brought a pie from a bakery and a potted rosemary plant, because he said he was trying to become the kind of man who doesn't show up empty-handed and confused. It was awkward, sweet in places, painfully sincere. He asked before setting anything down. He offered to help with dishes. He kept saying you're home with an odd mix of admiration and regret. At one point, he stood in our kitchen, watching Daniel baste a roast chicken, and said quietly to me, "I didn't know normal could sound this peaceful." I almost said, "It always could have." But sometimes mercy is telling the truth by not sharpening it further. So I just answered, "Me neither." The next spring, a full year after the anniversary dinner, the final repayment order was formalized. With interest and asset recovery, I would eventually recover a significant portion of what was taken. Not all, enough to matter. Melissa called with the finalized terms while I was at work. When I hung up, I expected some cinematic rush of victory. Instead, I sat at my desk and stared at the blue glow of my monitor while the office hummed around me. Printers, phones, distant laughter from the break room. Regular life, continuing. Justice, when it finally arrives, is often quieter than revenge fantasies promise. More administrative, more precise. Then, slowly, I smiled. Because it wasn't really about the money anymore. It was about the record. The truth existed somewhere official now. Somewhere outside family myth. It had been named, documented, enforced. You would be amazed how healing it is when gaslighting collides with paperwork. That evening, Daniel took me to dinner at a small restaurant downtown with brick walls and candlelight, and the kind of servers who never hover. Halfway through dessert, he reached across the table and said, "You know what I'm proudest of?" "What?" "You stopped auditioning for love." I laughed softly, then felt tears surprise me. because that was exactly it. For most of my life, I had performed usefulness in hopes of eventually being chosen. I had thought if I was generous enough, stable enough, forgiving enough, tireless enough, someone would finally look at me without comparison and say, "There you are. We see you. You were enough all along." Instead, I found something better. I learned to say it to myself. That summer, I got a letter, a real letter, handwritten, from my mother. I recognized the envelope immediately and almost threw it away unopened. Then curiosity, or maybe an old reflex, won. Inside was 4 pages of careful script. There was no full apology. There never would be. My mother was constitutionally incapable of entering a room without smuggling in justification. But there were fragments. I did not understand how much resentment had built. I thought helping Vanessa was temporary. I relied on your strength too much. I was wrong to let appearances matter more than clarity. The closest she came to truth was in the final paragraph. I see now that I asked you to carry what I would not ask of her, and then I punished you for carrying it well. I read that sentence 5 times. Then I put the letter back in the envelope and sat very still. My therapist later asked, "Did it give you closure?" "No," I said, "but it gave me accuracy." And sometimes accuracy is the only mercy available. I did not reconcile with my mother that year. Or the next. I saw Vanessa once by accident in a pharmacy parking lot. She was loading paper towels into the back of a smaller, cheaper SUV than the one she used to drive. She saw me too. For a second, neither of us moved. She looked older, not aged badly, exactly. Just stripped of the soft focus effect that constant rescuing gives people. Consequences had put angles on her. I wondered if she would come over, apologize, sneer, pretend. Instead, she closed the trunk and said, "You really got what you wanted." It was such a revealing sentence that I almost thanked her. "No," I said. "I got what was true." She rolled her eyes. "But not convincingly. You always think you're righteous." I shook my head. "No. I just finally stopped agreeing to be used." She stared at me a moment, lips thinning. Then she said the thing I think she'd believed her whole life. "You could afford it." There it was. Her theology. My capacity as consent. My stability as public property. My competence as justification for exploitation. I looked at her and felt, to my own surprise, not rage, just distance. I could afford kindness, I said, not betrayal. Then I got in my car and drove away. The real ending, if stories like this have real endings, happened on an ordinary Tuesday, not in court, not at a funeral, not during some dramatic family showdown, just a Tuesday. I was at home paying bills online. Electric, water, mortgage, contributions to savings, the small, predictable architecture of adult life. Daniel was upstairs on a work call. Rain ticked softly against the windows. When I clicked submit on the last payment, I sat back and laughed. A year earlier, paying bills had been tangled up with resentment, secrecy, and fear. Now it was just math. Honest math. My household. My choices. My peace. My phone buzzed. For one ridiculous second, old dread flashed through me. Then I looked. It was a text from Dad. Walked 2 miles today. Didn't get lost. Proud of myself. I smiled and typed back, "As you should be." A minute later, another text came in, this one from an unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then I opened it. It was my mother. Just one line. "I hope you are well. No guilt. No demand. No performance." Maybe it was progress. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe both. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I set the phone down without answering and looked around my kitchen. The bowl of lemons on the counter. The mail stacked neatly. The rain. The quiet. The life I had finally stopped apologizing for. That was the moment I understood something I wish I'd known 20 years earlier. Justice is not always making them suffer the way you suffered. Sometimes justice is this: they no longer get to define you. They no longer get to spend you. They no longer get to call your bleeding love and your boundaries cruelty. They no longer get access to the part of you that kept them comfortable at your expense. My parents sneered, "You'll never be as good as your sister." And for years I believed I had to prove them wrong by giving more. But the truth was simpler, sharper, and far more freeing. I never needed to be as good as my sister. I needed to stop being useful to people who only valued me when I was willing to disappear. So I did. And when the dust settled, when the lies were named, when the bills finally belonged to the people who made them, when the golden child had to live in the harsh white light of numbers, when my mother could no longer confuse exploitation with family loyalty, I found something no one in that house had ever offered me: peace. Not the fake peace of silence, not the peace of swallowing hurt, not the peace of being the bigger person while someone empties your pockets. Real peace. The kind that comes after truth. The kind that costs something. The kind that stays. And that, more than any courtroom, more than any torn document in a funeral home, more than any stunned look on my mother's face, was the part they never expected. I stopped sending money. Then I stopped sending access. And for the first time in my life, I kept something for myself. Me.